Well, of course he's lying. I mean, he told on himself because he said, I don't believe, in the super teams. And then in the very next sentence, he says, I believe I have a super team here. So clearly he recognizes that there are super teams that exist because he thinks he's on one, despite the fact that the super team just lost, if you're listening to him. Here's what I think that he's trying to dissect. I think he's trying to dissect the difference between himself and Kevin Durant because he wants to highlight now that the series is over, that the finals is over, and he gets an opportunity to address this with some degree of candor that he may have been lacking in the past. I think it's one of those things where he's trying to, for once and for all, really put an end to the comparisons between himself and Kevin Durant in terms of the adopted situations that they ended up in. LeBron when he went to South Beach, Kevin Durant when he went to the Bay Area. And I don't blame him for that because it's not the same. And let me say it for one last time. LeBron James went to Miami Heat squad that had been bounced out in the first round the previous season that also did not have Chris Bosh. And as a result, Dwayne Wade hadn't played with either one of them. LeBron James hadn't played with either one of them. Chris Bosh hadn't played with either one of them, along with a bevy of other individuals that were on the team. That was put together by Dwayne Wade and Pat Riley. They put it together. They implemented a system in concert with Eric Spoelstra and others. And as a result, they ultimately executed and went to 4 straight NBA Finals and won 2 of those titles. In the case of Kevin Durant joined a well-oiled machine that was fresh off a 73-9 all-time single-season record. They went to back-to-back NBA Finals. And Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, the Splash Brothers, the greatest shooting backcourt we had ever seen, combined with Draymond, combined with Iguodala, combined with Sean Livingston, they had all played together. So it was really just a matter of Kevin Durant ingratiating himself into that culture, that system, and that team. And due to his selflessness, combined with his greatness, we all knew that it was something that could conceivably be done immediately. In the case of LeBron James and Miami and those boys, that clearly was not the case, evidenced by them losing in the finals to the Dallas Mavericks, and that was that.
Yeah, that's true. It wasn't the case in year 1, but LeBron was together with those guys for 4 years, and by year 2, it is the case. What's the real difference here? First, has LeBron played on a super team? Duh, of course. If LeBron James is playing with 2 other current all-stars, that's a super team because of his presence. You talk about the fact that Miami was a mediocre team before he got there, Stephen A. Obviously, if you add LeBron James to a mediocre team, you're going to have an excellent team. If you add LeBron James and another prime, unselfish all-star like Chris Bosh, who was the centerpiece offensively and defensively for a playoff team in Toronto and was willing to sacrifice numbers because he's just a great player to play with LeBron in Miami, if LeBron makes a mediocre team really, really good, you add another all-star like that, they're going to be great. And they were great because it was a super team. That's how it is. That's how good LeBron is. And that Magic and Bird documentary, Best of Enemies, which aired last night on ESPN and was excellent, by the way. Larry Bird gets to Boston. A bad team, 29-win teams, wins 60 games the next year, 61 games. Why? Because they just got Larry Bird. So that's what happens when you add LeBron James to a team that has an all-star and you add another all-star. What's the difference between him and Kevin Durant? Really, Stephen A.? Because if you were talking about one season, again, you'd be right. But they were together for 4 seasons. So by season 2, that other stuff doesn't wash anymore, particularly if they're well coached. And LeBron has been well coached by Eric Spoelstra, and he's been well coached by Ty Lue, particularly if they have competent front offices, which was the case in Miami and which is now the case in Cleveland. Particularly when LeBron James's presence means you get veterans to sign, good players to sign for less than they're worth because they want to have a chance to win a championship. Mike Miller, Ray Allen, etc. That's what happens. That's the LeBron James effect. The difference between LeBron and Kevin Durant, as you mentioned, is by Durant joining a team that already existed, you don't have to take anything away in a trade. He simply signed. And they already have the bench set up, the starters set up. They've already played together. You just have to integrate the one piece. Really, what we're saying is Kevin Durant took LeBron James's super team blueprint and improved upon it, rather than bringing one together and then needing a year or 2 to work on it. Durant simply slid himself right into that situation. LeBron has 2 options now. He can either do the same thing and eventually beat Durant, say in San Antonio, or he can continually run into the Golden State Warriors, which are at the moment a brick wall because Kevin Durant took LeBron James's super team blueprint improved on it, and he's on a super duper team.
Yeah, but the reality is clear. Number one, we're talking about year one because that's all that we have on Kevin Durant's resume in Golden State. What's going to be is something we can address at a later date, but LeBron James gave that question, answered that question in the immediate aftermath of losing the NBA Finals on Monday night, which was year one of Kevin Durant in Golden State. So bringing up LeBron James and saying he had 4 years, we're talking about the first year. That's number one. Number two, you brought up the comparisons between, what Kevin Durant inherited in Golden State, what LeBron walked into. Eric Spoelstra had never coached out of the first round at the time that LeBron James had arrived there. I believe he only had like 1 year under his belt or so at the time that LeBron James arrived. So when you look at it 1 or 2 years, so when you look at it from that perspective, it wasn't Steve Kerr's resume, who not only was a 5-time champion as a player, but was already an NBA champion as a head coach 2 seasons earlier. And then the very next year, he went back to the NBA Finals. So there was loads and loads, not to mention the fact that he was a former GM in the NBA in Phoenix with Mike D'Antoni and all of those guys when they had Nash and Stoudemire and Joe Johnson and all of these other guys. So the extensive level of experience that Steve Kerr had, okay, clearly eclipsed that of Eric Spoelstra, which means that you had a culture that was in place that Kevin Durant was also walking into, which was incredibly advantageous to compare
LeBron
to
had
what
to
LeBron
create,
walked into.